Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have P.3. A simple yet challenging shoot 'em up. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer DevJ and publisher Red Deer Games, P.3 released for the Nintendo Switch in April of 2022. It had previously released for the PC in 2019. So this title is very simple when it comes to its control scheme. You have two buttons and that's it. But the game also has a fair bit of challenge to it, and it also has some roguelike upgrades that I do really enjoy. And at the time of this recording, it also happens to be on sale for a really great value, so this is definitely a title that I would recommend you try out if you're interested in a more simplistic breakdown of shoot 'em ups, but still a fair bit of challenge. And if you can get it on sale, all the better. Diving into the game itself, we find ourselves at the main menu here. Pressing to begin, there's this circle menu where we can go through a couple different options. So you have the ability to go into options, and there are some CRT filters here, as well as the ability to turn off sound effects and music, and there's also a HUD you can turn on, but it's really simple, so not unnecessary, definitely. But no options for Tate or anything like that, unfortunately. There's also the ability to change your wallpaper. P3 is the default here. We can switch between the moon, some enemies, a blank screen, and back to P3. Then, of course, beginning the game itself, which right off the bat we're thrown up against this enemy, the eyeball. So our two buttons are left and right, and in the reality, you can use just about any type of left or right available on your controller. You can use the analog, although the analog is a little bit tricky because if it's not actually directly left or right, it'll kind of eat your input. The D-pad left and right, which is kind of my preferred, and you can also use both the bumps and the triggers on a standard controller. So options abound. I'm assuming on a keyboard it would have been like bound to a couple of keys as well, which in some ways would be nice. So we just finished the first stage, dealing enough damage to the eyeball goes away when it hits about half health, and you complete the first stage. And it introduces us to the upgrades. This is very important, as it's really the meat of the game in my opinion. So between each stage you'll be able to choose between three upgrades. Upgrading your ship's HP, upgrading your ship's power, and upgrading your ship's speed. Initially, my first recommendation is power, as that will help you get through the rest of the game with greater ease, but the HP and the speed definitely have their place. So before we move on to the next stage, let's take a real quick second to talk about what's on the screen. So at the top of the screen there's an E with two thick bars. That's our ship's HP. If you were to take the HP upgrade, you'd add additional bars in there, and depending on the attack, some attacks will deal 1 bar of damage, 2, or some will just wipe us out regardless. There also happen to be some tick marks around our HP, and that's the stage progress indicator, or the HP indicator of the boss, depending. And you'll see an indicator climbing up on that, and then it'll be red and climbing down for the boss. We also see our upgrade level at the bottom, and under our health there is a number 5. That 5 is the number of enemies we need to defeat to level up. So picking power, we begin the next stage. So an important thing to note, you don't actually fire unless you're holding down your fire button. So if we just let go, we'll drift in the direction we were last moving, but we're not firing. Not very helpful. So here we've defeated 5 enemies. We're taken to our level up screen, and this is where the game gets really interesting. You can get a ton of different upgrade options, but you'll only ever be given 3, hence the roguelike element of it. So our options this time around are: we can upgrade our ship's speed, we can upgrade the ship's weapon energy, and this will basically increase our fire rate, or we can pick a higher level of power for the rifle. Really, between upgrading the rifle or getting the weapon energy, it's almost about the same thing. So let's go with a higher rate of fire versus more power. So I haven't talked about using the secondary weapon, and that's really crucial to the game, especially fighting the bosses. So if you hold both buttons at once, so this is usually best accomplished with using either the bumps or the triggers, then you'll fire your secondary. We leveled up again, so let's look at something a little bit different. Rather than using the rifle or going with the Vulcan, we'll take the laser. Laser has a slower rate of fire, but it does pierce through enemy shots as well as enemies themselves. So if we hold down both directional buttons at once, we do get this awesome charged secondary. Although your secondary can change, and it all is dependent on what upgrades you choose when you level up. So this end section of this stage is actually quite difficult, as you don't hold still when you let go of the controller. So moving through those tight areas, you basically kind of have to wiggle. So we find ourselves against our second boss, Fist. This boss is actually pretty neat, as we've got the two fists with some various attacks, and then the core that we need to defeat. The laser, where it does pierce, actually kind of makes this fight a little bit trivial, and I think is even more effective than using our secondary, the charged rifle at this point. Although, well, if we can get it in there, it would be helpful, but the piercing, I think, is our better option for dealing damage. So there are two different enemy shot types rather. There's ones that are red with white interiors, as well as ones that are just straight red. So the ones that are red with white interiors we can destroy with our own shots. However, the ones that are just straight red we cannot. So you need to be careful of what to avoid. And along those lines, we're going to upgrade our HP between stages, as things do get a fair bit more difficult right off the bat. So in the last stage we were in, it was possible to bump into the walls, but as you can see here, the walls are spikes. Bumping into the walls is not going to be good for us at all. So here we have the ability to upgrade our laser. We can also upgrade our power, which would actually accomplish the same thing as upgrading our laser, or we could add a helper, in this case the missile. It's also possible to get an assistant is what it's called, which is basically just an option. So we'll upgrade the missile just to add some additional firepower to our repertoire. So there's a couple other things I haven't talked about gameplay wise. So every once in a while you'll get those warning symbols, and there's just be this annoying laser that drenches down the screen at random intervals. I can't say I'm a fan. Oh, this part of the stage is really neat. So we've got these sections where it indicates where our safe areas are, and we just have to move through those. Once again, it's kind of difficult to hold your ship in a straight line, so that's where some of the challenge is. Let's go ahead and swap to the Vulcan. It's going to drop our power down to power level 2, but that should be alright. So it's great for being able to attack a lot of enemies at once, but weak power, as you would expect from a Vulcan cannon. In addition to those lasers, the last thing I haven't talked about is occasionally when defeating enemies, we will get a couple power-ups that drop from them. Unfortunately, it's actually quite difficult to collect those. There's two power-ups, one which will help restore some health, and one that will give us a temporary shield around our ship. So useful, but difficult to collect. So when you die, you can quickly restart the game, but you're just set back to the beginning of the stage that you're on, which is useful. It gives you the chance to potentially upgrade. However, there's a finite number of ships to a stage, so even if you make it all the way through a stage, like say the first stage we were played all the way through, you're only going to be able to upgrade so far. And even as you see here with the Vulcan cannon, we're not really making a ton of progress through these enemies. So that is basically P3 served up for your enjoyment. So right off the bat, one minus flavor I can talk about, and this is very evident with the Vulcan, is there is some screen shake, and unfortunately in the options there's not the ability to disable that. So that's something that I do like to disable when I'm playing a game, and I was a little disappointed that that wasn't an option. In addition to that, I feel that certain upgrades at certain points in the game can just really lead to you having a much harder time of the game, such as taking the Vulcan cannon. It's my least favorite option, but I figured we'd show it off. It is possible to get somewhere with it, but it's going to be a challenge to say the least. Actually, it might be wiser for us to occasionally switch to using our secondary to defeat these enemies. It does overheat though, so that can be something you also need to consider. But then, as far as the plus flavors are concerned, so this is a little bit different for me. Although I'm usually not the biggest fan of games that are just built solely on challenge, where the control scheme is so simple on this game, just being straight up left and right, I do appreciate that it does have a challenge, and it's basically almost this puzzle that it's like saying, alright, so here's my challenge, this is what you've got, how are you going to tackle it? And so, can you rise to that challenge? Can you get through this game? I do appreciate that a fair bit. And then I also really love the roguelike element where you have all these different weapons, all these different upgrades, and so many of them didn't even come up for me in this particular run that I can't show off, like the charge laser, or, well, even in this case, it's like, I don't like the bomb shot, but I do like it better than the Vulcan, so we'll take that. But there's just so much more of this game to show off, and it's like just not being generous and letting us do so. So that's P3, served up your enjoyment, not to be confused with something like, say, Persona 3. On the PC, it's actually known more as like P.3, but I'm assuming just for simplicity on the eShop, it's just straight up P3. Definitely one that I recommend if you like what you see here. It's an interesting shoot 'em up, if a challenge and short. So that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us this week. I hope you yourself have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.